Mr. President.
Senator of Utah.
Mr. President, I have 7 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the American people understand, to varying degrees, but they have a general understanding for the fact that the work we do here in the Senate is a combination of things. Some of the things that we address are controversial. Some of them make the daily evening news or the cover of the newspaper the next day. Those tend to be the things that are more controversial, things on which there might be sharp disagreement, sometimes sharply divided down partisan lines, reflected based on where one's desk sits on in relation to the center aisle of this chamber. Other times, there might be controversy, but the controversy doesn't cut cleanly across party lines. We might have some Republicans and some Democrats on one side or the other. But in many instances, maybe not enough, but mercifully, there are many instances in which there is not only not much controversy, but no controversy at all. There's a significant amount of legislation that passes through this chamber every single year, unanimously, without a single no vote. Now, some of these, to be sure, might recognize the naming of a post office, or might recognize, I don't know, National Sofa Care Month, if there is such a thing. But others deal with discrete local issues, issues that, while important to a select few people who live around, for example, a particular piece of land owned by the federal government, it might be affected by the land management policy associated with that parcel, are very important to that local population, but might be completely unknown, not only to people on the other side of the country, but even to people in other parts of that same state. There's a fair amount of legislation that moves through the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, a committee that I currently chair, that fits in to each of these categories. Controversial bills, where there's a sharp Republican-Democratic divide, bills that have some controversy that cuts across party lines, and, yes, mercifully, this other category of non-controversial votes without a single substantive objection. So the American people understand that there will be opposition to a lot of pieces of legislation, but they also justifiably expect us to consider and pass bills on their merits. And as to this category of bills that are important to some, unknown to most, and controversial to no one, well, they expect us to get those passed in a timely fashion. I'm trying to do this quickly, expeditiously, and do it in the right way. Now, I tried doing it the right way, the same way I'm going to try today, back in May, on the 22nd of May. I tried to do it the right way again on July 29th. I tried doing it the right way again 2 weeks ago. This will be my 4th attempt to try to pass a small handful of extremely non-controversial bills that already passed this chamber unanimously without a single no vote last Congress at the end of last year, and that have moved forward from the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, again, without opposition from either side of the aisle, from any senator, earlier this year. Each of these times I've received an objection from the Democratic side of the aisle. At no point have I heard a single substantive objection to any of these bills in this category that I've tried to pass through this procedure, a procedure which is well-worn, which exists for exactly this circumstance. Because there are, across multiple committees, certainly within the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, there's a lot of legislation that falls into that category. Now, we're told repeatedly that there are simply too many bills for the Senate to consider individually. This is often the case. And it's often the case, in particular, that for a bill that has no opposition, for a bill that is very important to a population of people within a particular state as to a discrete issue, it might be important or interesting to literally no one else in any other state or even in other parts of the same state. We're told that these bloated bills that sometimes get combined, multiple pieces of legislation, sometimes amounting to thousands of pages at a time, can become a necessary evil to accommodate all the small lands bills important to our states. I'm here to tell you that that's simply not the case. It certainly need not be the case here, and it isn't. Now, had we moved these bills each time I've been on the floor this year, we certainly would have already been able to make significant progress in clearing the backlog so that we can deal with this problem that many people cite as a reason why we would need a massive, all-or-nothing, bloated, sewn-together lands package. Take it or leave it, all or nothing. Now, if we really need the bills passed, why can't we start at least with the low-hanging fruit? I have no delusions that this makes everything easy. It certainly doesn't. There's a lot in this process that can be difficult. But we ought to start with the bills that are non-controversial, that have yet to receive a single substantive objection on their merits, things that we all agree on. Why can't we move the bills that have already passed unanimously, that have already been vetted in committee this year and last year, and have passed on the Senate floor without a single no vote last year? Why come down here and object over and over again to bills that are non-controversial? Well, sometimes this is the muscle memory that can start to evolve, that can start to take hold within this body, but it need not be this way. It ought not be this way. It doesn't lead to good decisions, especially if this is how we treat the things that are non-controversial. It's going to make the things that, where there is some debate, some opposition, some dissent, more difficult, and the stuff that is sharply partisan, impossible. If you have a bill that you know can't pass on its own, well, then what do? Well, perhaps what you want to do is pair it with a bunch of other bills that are themselves non-controversial, hoping that it won't get noticed, or hoping that there will be enough other senators who will say, I guess we have to take it or leave it, so let it all pass. They might say, are you really going to sink all this important work just for one section of this much larger bill that you disagree with? Well, look, taken to its logical conclusion and repeated over and over again and applied even to non-controversial bills, this ends up being sort of extortive in its effect, and it doesn't produce a good outcome, not for people of either party, not for people of either legislative chamber, and certainly not for the American people. Just yesterday, we were able to do some things on the floor the right way. Senator Sullivan came to the floor and passed his bill to extend the deadline for Alaska Native Vietnam-era vets to claim the land allotments they earned through their service. This was only after Democrats, including my friend and colleague, the distinguished senior senator from New Mexico, Senator Heinrich, had objected to it twice. But his bill, Senator Sullivan's legislation that I just mentioned, is now headed to the president's desk to be signed into law. Now, there's no reason why that success, which we tasted just yesterday afternoon, can't continue here with similarly situated, similarly non-controversial, unanimously passed bills. So again, I've got 4 bills that I'll be asking unanimous consent to pass here today. They include S. 1084, which is the North Dakota Trust Lands Completion Act of 2025. This bill, sponsored by Senator Hoeven, passed last year with unanimous support and would authorize equal value exchanges to enable the state of North Dakota to manage its own state lands. S. 1142 is the Scarper Ridge Golden Gate National Recreation Area Boundary Adjustment Act. This bill, sponsored by Senator Padilla, passed last year and would make a minor boundary adjustment to the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, entirely non-controversial. S. 1016 is the Vicksburg National Military Park Boundary Modification Act. This bill, sponsored by Senator Wicker, is a minor but important boundary adjustment to the park, and it passed last year with unanimous support. S. 603, sponsored by Senator Kane, designates the George C. Marshall House in Virginia as an affiliated area within the national park system, simply allowing them to be affiliated with the National Park Service. This bill also passed with unanimous support. So what do these bills have in common? Well, they all are bipartisan, all passed the body unanimously without a single vote, no vote last Congress. I've heard zero substantive objections on the merits to any single one of these bills, and I stand ready to work with any member, Republican or Democrat, to move their bills off the floor, especially with regard to these non-controversial bills. We can get this done. We can work through this broken process. It need not be broken, especially as to this category of bills. This is the easy stuff. Let's not make the easy stuff hard, lest we incur the risk of making the harder stuff impossible. And so to that end, Mr. President, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged and that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the following bills en bloc. Further, that the bills as amended, if amended, where applicable, be considered, read a third time, and passed en bloc, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table, all en bloc. S. 1084, North Dakota Trust Lands Completion Act of 2025 from Senator Hoeven. S. 1142, the Scarper Ridge Golden Gate National Recreation Area Boundary Adjustment Act from Senator Padilla. S. 1016, the Vicksburg National Military Park Boundary Modification Act with a substitute amendment from Senator Wicker. And S. 603, to designate the General George C. Marshall House in the Commonwealth of Virginia from Senator Kane.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator of New Mexico.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, as I have said a number of times now, I am not willing to send Democratic bills to the House without an agreement to get them through the House and to the President's desk. Just last week, we saw the House pass a Senate Republican bill without the Senate Democratic bill that it had been paired with. Both bills are bipartisan. Both even have a budget score, and yet the Democratic bill sits with no plan to get it signed into law. We need to pass bills over here in a way that ensures that both Republican and Democratic priorities and bills become law. In addition, I do have substantive concerns with S. 1084. I was not the ranking member in the previous Congress, but it would give away public land without an equal value exchange or payment for conservation of other public land. The public is simply left out of the equation. That is not something I can support, and I'm certainly willing to work with the bill's sponsor on finding a path forward, but in its current form, I must object. Thank you, Mr. President.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator of Utah.
Mr. President, I appreciate my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from New Mexico, who has a genuine concern. It is a worthy concern, and it's a concern that I share in the sense that I want to make sure that both Democrats and Republicans serving this body on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, when they submit these bills, particularly bills in this category that I've described, that have passed unanimously in this body, be given ample opportunity for consideration and passage over in the House of Representatives. He is understandably concerned about the possibility of Republican and Democrat bills being sent over together, only to discover after the fact that the Democratic bills could languish. I understand that concern. I'm deeply sympathetic to it. And it is because I share that concern, and not in spite of it, that I believe this is the way we ought to do things. This is the way we do things elsewhere in the Senate, where we've got non-controversial legislation. Let's move them forward. Now, we've moved them forward. You've seen pairings here. Democrat bills brought to the floor, not stitched together surgically in one legislative package, but paper-clipped together in one stack so that we're presenting them for unanimous consent passage at the same time, but not as part of the same legislation. Why do we do this rather than the other way? Understanding the legitimacy of his concerns, we want to make sure that bills in this category in particular receive fair consideration regardless of whether there's a Democrat or Republican who's the sponsor of the bill. Number one, our House counterpart committee and others within the House of Representatives have told us that not only is this their preference, that they would rather have them paper-clipped, not stitched together as one bill, but sent over as separate bills. They said this will actually expedite, facilitate their ability to get them passed, whether they're passed by introduced by Republicans or Democrats in the House or in the Senate. Not always, by the way, is a Democrat bill here a Democrat bill on the other side of the Capitol. Sometimes it switches, but regardless, even for the bills that are introduced by a Democrat here and a Democrat there, these bills are considered, and we've been told over and over again by those with responsibility over this, they've got a better chance of passing singly than they would if we start stitching them together. In their view, as they've told me repeatedly, it will hinder, not expedite or facilitate their chances of being passed if we surgically stitch them together in one bill. There are a number of reasons for this, including the fact that the laws of gravity don't always operate the same way here as they do on the other side of the Capitol. Sometimes a bill that can move through over here without a single objection might draw some opposition on the other side of the Capitol for reasons that can be difficult to predict. In any event, there's a great safeguard in all of this in that the way the House of Representatives passes this, and I think this is inherent in why it is that they want them as separate bills that can be paper-clipped together for purposes of getting them passed by unanimous consent over here, but sent over there. The way they do it over there, they use a procedure in the House known as suspension of the rules. Under suspension of the rules, you've got to have 290 votes to pass it rather than a simple majority of 218 votes. That feature ends up replicating to a significant degree the effect of the cloture standard over here, such that it's got to be bipartisan, and so they can't afford to, and therefore don't, on bills like this, favor Republican bills over Democrat bills. Now, my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from New Mexico, noted a moment ago that his concerns are already materializing and that they're neglecting Democrat bills on the House while preferencing Republican bills. I don't see this. In fact, to the contrary, within the last week, the House of Representatives has passed multiple bills, I believe it was 3 or 4 bills, introduced by Democrats. Democrat bills run through the suspension of the rules calendar passed this week. They are not depreferencing them, and from what I've heard from multiple credible sources on the other side of the Capitol, this is because of the way the suspension of the rules practice works over there. They don't, in part because they can't get these passed if they preference Republican bills and depreference Democrat bills in this respect. Look, at the end of the day, we have to remember that a lot of what this chamber does operates by means of unanimous consent. Certainly in scheduling votes, scheduling just about anything, heck, scheduling what time we're going to go to lunch or adjourn for the evening until the next day requires unanimous consent. But a lot of legislation we pass gets done that way too, and thank heaven above that it can. If we can't do the easy stuff this way, the harder stuff becomes much more difficult, and the really tough stuff that still needs to get done, things like permitting reform, for example, where on both sides of the aisle you have strong opinions, you have a strong desire overall to see that permitting reform gets accomplished, you have somewhat differing ideas on what must be in there and what must not be included. Things like that that are very important to the public, but that are by no means non-controversial, become far more difficult to impossible. Let's get the easy stuff done. We did it yesterday afternoon. We can do it again. I'll be back, as I'm determined to push these bills forward, Republican and Democrat. And if we tie them together surgically in one bill, it'll impair their passage, Republican and Democratic alike. We don't need to do that here. We ought not. This is unfortunate, but I'll be back soon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator of Arkansas.
I'm saddened to share that Norman Podhoretz, a towering figure of American letters and politics, passed away last night. Not many men truly change the course of history. Those who do usually do it through their actions, like General U.S. Grant's brilliant military campaigns in the Civil War. Fewer still do it with a combination of words and actions, like Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps rarest of all are men like Norman Podhoretz, who change history with mere words. And what words they were. Norman was not only the longtime legendary editor and soul of Commentary magazine, but also a prolific author of a dozen books, hundreds of essays, articles, and columns, and no telling how many speeches. He could turn out 10,000 words of elegant, sparkling, cogent prose, seemingly at a moment's notice, while identifying for his readers the deeper meaning of the day's news. Norman was also an original neoconservative, and proud to be so. These days, some historically illiterate podcasters and so-called influencers use the term neocon as an all-purpose slur for anything they don't like. But the neocons were just that, new conservatives, a collection of anti-communist liberals between World War II and the Vietnam War who were, as the saying goes, mugged by reality. In this case, the reality of the new left's turn against America. Norman followed this path and blazed it for others. Born in 1930 to working-class Jewish immigrants in Brooklyn, Norman later said that the first Republican he met was in high school. Blessed with natural abilities and good teachers, Norman earned a scholarship to Columbia, while at his father's insistence, he also studied concurrently at the Jewish Theological Seminary and earned a degree in Hebrew literature. After more studies at Cambridge and 2 years in the Army, he returned to New York and wrote for magazines such as The New Yorker and Partisan Review, and ran in the liberal intellectual social circles of the times with the likes of Norman Mailer and Allen Ginsberg. He also wrote for and worked at Commentary, a journal of Jewish thought, which at the time fit well into those circles. He became editor-in-chief in 1960, on the eve of the disorder, chaos, and anti-Americanism that would be unleashed by the New Left that decade. They considered this country to be evil, Norman said of the New Left in 1995, continuing. We neoconservatives were not only outraged by this attitude and thought it intellectually wrong in almost every detail, but also thought it was morally outrageous, contemptible, and dangerous. Soon enough, Norman and Commentary defined the neoconservative movement, especially on foreign policy. They published famous, path-setting essays, such as Gene Kirkpatrick's Dictatorships and Double Standards, and The United States in Opposition by Pat Moynihan. No less a titan than Ronald Reagan called Norman a must-read for conservatives of all stripes. Norman, Kirkpatrick, and other neocons both followed and led Reagan into the presidency, helping to shape a strong and confident foreign policy of defending American interests and free peoples against the menace of Soviet Russia and anti-American insurgencies around the world. Norman maintained a friendly dialogue with Reagan over the years and received a richly deserved Presidential Medal of Freedom from President George W. Bush. Norman turned over the reins at Commentary in 1995, but he never put down the pen. I'm thankful he didn't, because that was also the year I discovered the magazine and became a 30-year subscriber. Norman and Commentary were there to chronicle the threat from militant Islam, communist China, and growing anti-Semitism and radicalism at home. Thanks to great thinkers like Norman, I cannot claim to be a neoconservative. I was, if I could borrow a phrase, right from the beginning. Generations of young readers learned the easy way from Norman what he had learned the hard way, never flirting with liberalism in our youth. As, in his own words, a filthy little slum child of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, Norman was eternally grateful to America for welcoming his family and providing him with unlimited opportunity. Norman said that he had a love affair with America. A love affair with America. I think that's a very apt way to put it, and something we should all try to emulate and instill in our kids and grandkids. Norman's love affair with America, I suspect, was behind his dogged support for Donald Trump when so many of his old friends abandoned our party in 2016. But Norman saw President Trump's election as, quote, a kind of miracle. He believed that President Trump could, in his words, save us from the evil on the left. Despite all their differences, with their shared love of America, their hatred of communism, their shared New York roots, indeed their shared Brooklyn to Manhattan journey, Norman and the president may not be quite the strange bedfellows that they first appeared to be. I'm confident that Norman was pleased with the president's muscular defense of the American way of life upon his return to office, and I'm especially pleased that Norman lived to watch America join with Israel to devastate Iran's nuclear program on President Trump's watch. One of the great benefits of my work as a senator is the opportunity to cross paths with great men like Norman Podhoretz. After learning from his writing for so many years, I've had the occasion to meet him and share a modest correspondence. I can share that Norman may have receded from public writing in recent years, but he remained as witty, brilliant, and courageous as ever in his private correspondence. Yet, as we all sometimes do when we reflect on our lives, Norman too acknowledged that he at times wondered what it all amounted to, and sometimes feared the answer was, not much. But nothing could be further from the truth, I assured him. For nearly 70 years, Norman informed, educated, persuaded, and succeeded with his words. He taught multiple generations not just to love our country, but also why we should love it and how to defend it. His words reached to the United States Congress, the Oval Office, and into the councils of nations. Without Norman and the little magazine he led, the course of history, the Reagan Revolution and the Cold War in particular might indeed have been very different. I therefore join Norman's family, not only in mourning the loss of this great man, but also in celebrating the highly consequential life of a true American patriot. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to honor the life of Ella Cook, one of the victims in last weekend's horrific attack that killed 2 and left more wounded at Brown University. Ella was a 19-year-old female and a sophomore at Brown. Her life was taken far too soon in a disgusting act of violence that leaves all of us searching for answers. You know, moments like this remind all of us how short life really is and how important it is to take advantage of every moment. Ella certainly took advantage of every moment she had with us here on earth. She grew up in Mountain Brook, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham, with 2 loving parents, Anna and Richard, and 2 siblings, Hooker and Mary Hamner. Ella loved to play piano, dance, and travel. She was studying French at Brown University. She also loved kids and spent much of her time babysitting and serving in Sunday school. She believed her highest calling was to be a mom one day. But the most important thing to know about Ella is that she was a devout Christian. She was very involved in her church, the Cathedral Church of the Advent in Birmingham, and was loved by everyone there. In her obituary, it says, not only did her personal faith shine out like a bright Christmas star, but she loved others as real people, not as objects. Ella loved God with her whole heart, and she loved people with her whole heart. The Reverend of Ella's church described her as an incredible, grounded, faithful, bright light who lifted up those around her. I can't think of a better legacy to leave behind than that. She went off to college at Brown, where she was studying French, mathematics, economics, and was obviously very, very smart. She also was a patriot who loved this country, and she served as vice president of the college Republicans at Brown University. She was clearly a very courageous young lady, and I can't imagine that was an easy job on such a liberal campus as Brown. But Ella was resolute in her mission to speak the truth and to fight every day for Christian values that have made this country great. The president of the College Republicans of America described Ella as being known for her bold, her brave, and kind heart as she served her chapter and her fellow classmates. You know, the true measure of a life is not found in its length, but its impact. And in the stories shared and the grief that is being expressed, it is clear that Ella left a lasting imprint on the people that she touched. You know, Alabama misses Ella, and we join her family and friends in grieving her loss. You know, it certainly seems like this might have been a targeted attack. We will not rest until the deranged psychopath who did this is brought to justice. But that being said, may God bless the Cook family. Give them peace and comfort in the midst of unspeakable tragedy. And may we honor Ella by carrying forward the values she lived by. Though her life was taken far too soon, we know she is in heaven now. And we will make sure that Ella's legacy of patriotism and faith lives on here on earth. May God bless the Cook family, and may God bless Ella Cook. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator Michigan.
Mr. President, we are quickly approaching the end of 2025. And this past year, particularly here in Congress, we've been met with a lot of challenges, chaos as well as change. But there's one issue that unfortunately has not changed. And that, Mr. President, is our ballooning national debt. Throughout the year, I've repeatedly come to the Senate floor to pound the drum on this very serious issue. I've outlined the history of how we got to this point, and I've urged all my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, to join me in taking action to address our runaway debt before it is too late. So as we end the year, I'm back on the floor today to remind my colleagues of the dire financial situation that we currently face, and to focus specifically on the harmful consequences that it has on everyday lives of hardworking Americans. But let's first take a quick bird's eye view of the situation. At the start of 2025, our national debt sat at a staggering $36.2 trillion. Today, thanks in part to the irresponsible big ugly bill that President Trump and Republicans passed this summer, that number has now ballooned by $2 trillion just in 1 year, our debt now sits at $38.4 trillion. To put that number into perspective, when I was sworn into Congress back in January of 2009, the national debt stood at $10.6 trillion. So that means in 16 years, our national debt has nearly quadrupled. And unfortunately, it's only getting worse. I think I speak for most Americans when I say it's hard to even fathom that amount of money. And Americans might wonder what our debt actually means for them and for their personal finances. Well, the reality is it isn't some abstract, made-up number. The national debt is a real-life burden that our country has to contend with. And ultimately, the brunt of that burden falls hardest on the people who are just fighting to make ends meet in this increasingly unaffordable economy. So let's break it down. On one front, it's simply an issue of having fewer resources available to invest in American families. Because our debt has gotten so out of control, each year, Congress is having to use more and more of everyday tax dollars to pay down just the interest on that debt. We're not even paying off the debt itself. We're just paying down the interest. In fact, the interest alone that we pay annually on our debt now exceeds the amount we spend on every single federal program except Social Security. That means less of your tax dollars are being sent back to your community to invest in stronger roads and safer neighborhoods and better schools. It means that less resources are available for programs that help Americans put food on the table, afford childcare, or gain new skills through workforce training initiatives. Particularly as American families continue to face an affordability crisis, the prices just keep going up, this support is needed now more than ever. And failing to invest in those who need it most because our debt is bogging us down will only add fuel to that fire. On another front, Americans have continued to experience high inflation this year that can be tied to this growing national debt. And when inflation goes up, the Federal Reserve has to raise interest rates to combat those higher prices. And as interest rates rise, so do Americans' largest expenses, from their car payments to their home mortgage to their student loans. Essentially, the longer we go without addressing this national debt, the purchasing power of Americans' hard-earned money will shrink each and every day. And families will continue struggling to afford the cost of everyday life. Because, unlike the federal government, Americans actually have to live within their means and adhere to their household budget. But unfortunately today, too many American households find themselves trapped in a cycle of debt and financial insecurity just to meet their bottom line. More and more we see this is the case, even when both parents are working and doing everything they can to give their children a better future. This is an entirely different reality than what Donald Trump and his billionaire supporters live in. Instead of paying their fair share like most Americans, Republicans just wrote President Trump and the richest Americans a more favorable tax code, making sure that they get to hold on to their wealth and watch it grow. And when the richest Americans still don't succeed, they're given leeway to bail themselves out. And we don't have to look any further than our president, whose companies have filed for bankruptcy at least 4 times. 4 times filed for bankruptcy, the President of the United States. And yet he contributes less to serving our national debt than teachers and firefighters and hardworking Americans who play by the rules each and every day. The average American isn't afforded that luxury. As a result, our federal deficits grow, inflation remains high, and the American people are left with nothing but rising prices, stagnant wages, and bitter feelings about being left behind. For too long, we have propped up the wealthy and forced the middle-class Americans to pay the bill. It's unacceptable, and if we have any hope of getting our fiscal house in order, this needs to change. Congress is about to wrap up for the year. But when we reconvene, our debt will still be there, the largest it's ever been. And we just can't make this debt go away. Lawmakers are going to have to put policies and politics aside and come together to figure out a way to address this issue. So in 2026, I'm going to keep sounding the alarm on our national debt, highlighting the everyday consequences and delving into the ways in which we can finally take steps to put our country on more sound financial footing. We all say that we care about addressing our growing debt. Everybody here in this chamber says it. But in 2026, let's actually put our money where our mouth is, and let's make it happen. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, I had the pleasure of attending the Reagan National Defense Forum at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. I've been to the event a few times before. It's a beautiful setting. The library is such a great tribute to one of our greatest presidents, Ronald Reagan, who is known for his efforts to rebuild the military through peace through strength in the Reagan years that we often think about and talk so much about today. The forum has been around for 12 years. This was the 12th annual event, and I've been able to attend the incredible event a few times early on in my time in the House, serving in the House of Representatives. It's been a few years since I've been there. But the event is filled with some of our nation's top military leaders, cabinet officials, administration officials, much of the leadership of the Pentagon. It's also a bipartisan event with a congressional delegation from both sides of the aisle, includes also leaders and innovators in our national defense industry who join the event every year as well. At this past forum, I participated in a panel discussion about recruitment and retention in our military. I was actually joined by a former Democrat colleague of mine in the House, Jimmy Panetta, a Democrat from California. Coincidentally, his father, the former Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, was sitting in the audience to hear his son and myself and the other members of the panel talk about this important subject. The panel got me thinking, though, as we close out 2025, about how far we have come in just 1 year on this subject, recruitment and retention in the military. As we close out 2025, I can think of many big wins that have come out of the Trump administration, but none as significant as what President Trump and Secretary of War Hegseth have done to repair the recruitment crisis that took place on Joe Biden's watch. This unbelievable accomplishment doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. And that's why I wanted to come down to the floor today and talk about that incredible success story and share with you some of what I talked about in that panel a little over a week ago. When I served in the House of Representatives before I got to the Senate, I chaired the Military Personnel Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee. So I saw up close how bad things got under Joe Biden, especially at the Pentagon and in our military. When Joe Biden was president, he presided over the worst recruitment crisis in the over 50 years of an all-volunteer force of our military. In 2022, the Army set a goal to recruit 60,000 new soldiers, but only managed to recruit 45,000. That's 15,000 soldiers short. And the same thing happened again the following year in 2023, when the Army was again 15,000 soldiers short of its 65,000 soldier recruitment goal. When you add up the recruitment losses under Joe Biden between 2021 and 2025, the Army shrank by 40,000 soldiers due to a lack of new recruits. That's as much as 4 divisions of troops in the United States Army. The same story, Mr. President, happened to the Navy, which I know is important to you, is important to me. In 2023, the Navy was 7,500 short of its goal to recruit 37,000 new sailors. In 2024, it was nearly 5,000 short of its goal to recruit over 40,000 new sailors. So between 2021 and 2025, the Navy shrank by 16,000 sailors, which is about 3 aircraft carriers worth of United States sailors. That's how bad the recruitment crisis got on Joe Biden's watch. But how did this happen? I think this is important context and history when we evaluate where we are today. It's clear to everyone that the Biden administration treated the military as a political experiment. I don't think, Mr. President, we've seen the military politicized in a way that it was under the 4 years that Joe Biden was president ever before in American history. The Biden Pentagon dropped physical fitness standards to promote equity and supported woke DEI initiatives throughout the armed services. As a side note, by the way, the Marines were the only good news on recruitment during those 4 years because the Marine Corps never dropped their standards. But you had former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who immediately after Joe Biden was sworn into office, ordered a 60-day stand down to combat extremism in the military. They spent nearly 6 million man-hours military-wide on that stand down. Those are hours, Mr. President, that could have been spent on training our troops to combat our biggest enemy, our biggest threat, that being China. Or I would contend to you that those 6 million man-hours could have been spent on preparing to evacuate and leave Afghanistan in a much more responsible way than what the military did. Instead, they focused in on politics at the beginning of the Biden administration. Then you had General C.Q. Brown, who at the time was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who issued racial quotas for the United States Air Force. You had the Joe Biden's Secretary of the Army, Christine Wormuth, arguing that it was a bad thing that more than 80% of our recruits come from military families. Think about that for a minute. She said there was, quote, a risk of developing a warrior caste in America. When the Secretary of the Army should have been trying to boost recruitment, she insulted patriotic Americans who are inspired by their parents to serve and suggested that the Army didn't want them. It's no wonder that we had a recruitment crisis in the United States Army. Mr. President, when you combine all of these factors, it's no wonder that the military under Joe Biden failed to meet its recruitment numbers. Simply put, fewer young Americans wanted to serve because they stopped believing in the mission. I often think back to an article from the Wall Street Journal that I read back in 2023. It had a poll that showed that patriotism among Americans, especially young Americans, had plummeted to historic lows. Again, 2023, Joe Biden's the president, aftermath of what happened in Afghanistan, all of this other foolish experimentation, the politicization of our military. According to that poll, only 38% of Americans in 2023 said that patriotism was very important to them. That's down from 70% in the 1990s. And to this day, this story astonishes me. I'd love to see an update from the Wall Street Journal on that poll to show what those patriotism numbers look like today. Mr. President, I know you know this, you can't build a military without patriots. You can't ask young men and women to put their lives on the line when the culture tells you that the country isn't worth fighting and dying for. You can't expect the next generation of Americans to raise their right hand, Mr. President, like you did, like I did, like so many of our colleagues did in the United States Senate, to protect this nation when so few believe that America is the greatest country in the history of the world. Something else that I think about is how catastrophic the withdrawal from Afghanistan played a huge part in the shortage of military recruitment under Joe Biden as well. Americans saw 13 brave service members killed at Abbey Gate, including a Hoosier, and American guns and vehicles abandoned to the Taliban on that embarrassing and disastrous and deadly day. It didn't exactly inspire people to serve. Young Americans asked themselves, Who wants to be part of that type of military? And they said, not me. Mr. President, the good news, though, and I want to get to the good news because this is really good news. The good news is that this has all been fixed in a really short period of time. President Trump changed everything. In fact, it changed immediately on Election Day just a little over a year ago. Military leaders testified to the fact that military recruitment increased dramatically the day that Donald Trump won the election. The Army met its 2025 recruitment numbers 4 months early. The Army reached its retention goals for the whole year in just 6 months. Navy recruitment hit a 20-year record. And how did all of this happen? President Trump and Secretary Hegseth inspired young people to serve again. Because President Trump and Secretary Hegseth are restoring our military's strength and greatness. They cut away the woke DEI initiatives throughout the Department of War and focused on what really matters to our military: patriotism, a sense of mission, and lethality. Under Joe Biden, young Americans saw the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan. Today, they see a military that puts America first, taking out narco-terrorist drug boats before they can bring deadly drugs into our country. 71% of Americans say that they support these strikes on these drug boats. When you ask young men and women if that's the type of military that they want to be a part of, one that's stopping drugs from flooding into America, killing our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our friends, you get an overwhelming yes. When America is strong, when America is confident, when America wins, our young people want to be a part of that. They want to serve. Patriotism isn't dead. It was just dormant during those 4 years, waiting for leadership that America can believe in, like what we've got in the White House today and Donald Trump. Secretary of War Hegseth is doing an extraordinary job. He's the exact leader at the department that we need to restore the focus on lethality after 4 disastrous years under Joe Biden when the focus was on anything but that. He has brought back the warrior ethos to our military and has worked hard to ensure that America's military can meet tomorrow's challenges. Our enemies have been put on notice under Pete Hegseth's leadership at the Department of War. Mr. President, the path forward is clear. We must continue supporting this administration's efforts to restore our military and make our military as great as it can be again. Our all-volunteer military depends on Americans who choose to serve. And Americans will choose to serve when they believe in the mission, trust their leaders, and take pride in this great country. President Trump is giving them that, and America is stronger for it. That's some great news, Mr. President, as we close out 2025. There's so many things to talk about, but this accomplishment, in and of itself, what President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have done to restore recruitment, save our military, is really good news that I wanted to come to the floor and talk about as we close out this year on the eve of going home for this Christmas break. Mr. President, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. I'm looking forward to a lot more good news like this to come in 2026. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We heard so much over the weekend from Tennesseans who were reaching out, just so saddened by the series of truly devastating attacks. We saw in Syria, 2 of our National Guard members from Iowa lost their life, and indeed we know that right now President Trump and Senators Grassley and Ernst are out at Dover to meet with those families, but these are 2 that were killed by an ISIS gunman. And at Brown University, a gunman shot and killed 2 students that were in a session as they prepared for exams right there on the college campus. One of those was a young woman from Alabama who was vice president of the college Republican Club. Another was an aspiring neurosurgeon. And these are two young people that had very bright and promising futures in front of them. In Australia, the terrorist that opened fire on a Hanukkah celebration, they murdered 15 people, including a 10-year-old girl and a Holocaust survivor. We know that anti-Semitism is a sickness. It is spreading across the globe, and world leaders must do more to protect their Jewish communities. Our nation's prayers remain with all of these victims, with their families, and those that experienced these tragedies. And we can all be grateful that in Donald J. Trump, we have a president who is committing to serving the justice when it is needed. Terrorism will not have the last word. And we have seen how the FBI has worked to thwart these plots that are taking place here in our country. And they announced on Monday that agents had thwarted a New Year's Eve terror plot that was planned for Los Angeles by a pro-Palestine extremist group. The 4 suspects are now in federal custody, and we know they will face the full force of the law. God bless the men and women in federal law enforcement and in our armed services that are really working around the clock to restore safety and security here in our country. And under President Trump, we've seen national security has become a priority. In fact, when we look back over the last year, one theme sticks out about the administration's accomplishments. President Trump is keeping his word. He is making America safer and stronger than ever before. And you can look at the southern border. In a matter of months, President Trump completely fixed the Biden border crisis. The president was right when he said we didn't need more laws, we just needed a new president, one who would enforce the laws. Now, in October, there were just over 11,000 apprehensions at the southern border. The same month last year, in 2024, there were over 100,000 encounters at the border, and that was under the Biden border policies. Now, even the year before that, there were 240,000 encounters. So think about that, from 240,000 down to 100,000, down to 11,000. And what changed was the fact that we had a president who was enforcing the law. Now, also, in my wonderful state of Tennessee, Memphis saw the highest crime rate per capita in 2024. But since September, the administration's Memphis Safe Task Force has made more than 4,200 arrests, including hundreds of warrant arrests for domestic violence, aggravated assault, and dozens more for narcotics, sexual assault, and homicides. They've also located more than 120 missing children, have recovered 970 illegal firearms, and 560 stolen vehicles. Now, with President Trump and A.G. Bondi and Kash Patel and the commitment that they have made to Memphis, this is what you are seeing. Criminals are being apprehended, and the citizens in Memphis feel safe to go out and about. The crime rate has been cut in half. Now, President Trump is replicating the success we're seeing in Memphis. He's replicating that all across the country, whether it's here in Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, and other areas. And around the globe, President Trump has restored peace through strength after years of weakness from the Biden administration. And we have to note, when we talk about globally what he has done, ending 8 wars making the world a safer place, not only for Americans, but for so many. Across the government, President Trump has also rooted out woke programs that abuse taxpayer dollars under the previous administration, and we saw a lot of corruption in our institutions. With these programs, the Biden administration pushed a radical anti-American agenda, and now, with the Trump administration, we're restoring common sense and putting the American citizen first. On the economy, the president's pro-growth and pro-worker agenda is already delivering. Since its peak under Biden, inflation is down 67%. Of course, we all remember under Biden, it was at a 40-year high. And now that has come down 67%, and it will continue to come down. The trade deficit is shrinking. Our nation is bringing in trillions of dollars in new investments, and this is going to create new factories, jobs, and opportunities. And Mr. President, we're so pleased. Some of those jobs are coming into Tennessee. Some of those investments are coming into our state. And the president has focused on making American energy dominant once again. We were pleased to see that in his first few days in office, he eliminated a lot of the Green New Deal, and because of that, the national average for a gallon of gas is at its lowest price since March of 21. He's also signed executive orders to support nuclear energy, including speeding up approvals for new reactors and strengthening fuel supply chains. And more than any other state, Tennessee is best positioned to lead our nation's nuclear renaissance, especially with the work that is being done at the Oak Ridge National Lab and our universities. And I will remind my colleagues, our nuclear energy industry had its birth at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. We also have the Clinch River site, which should soon be home to the nation's first small modular reactor. And taking advantage of this opportunity, the Tennessee Valley Authority has got to step up, and they have to lead the way. This week, the Senate is set to confirm 4 of the president's nominees to serve on TVA's board of directors and ensure that Tennessee and our nation does lead in nuclear energy. Supporting all of these accomplishments is the big, beautiful bill, or the working people's tax cut bill. This is something that was signed into law on Independence Day, and in that legislation, the largest tax cut in history at $4 trillion, including no tax on tips and overtime and Social Security, a provision I have worked to achieve for years. Historic funding to finish the border wall. $50 billion to support rural health. Permitting reforms to make it easier to build in America again. A generational investment in our military, and I could go on and on. And in the last year, this administration with President Trump and Republicans have been hard at work to make certain that we address the cost of living, that we address safety in our nation and around the globe, and to improve the quality of life, a stronger, freer, and safer country than ever before. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from California.
in a moment, I'm going to ask this body to pass legislation requiring the Department of Defense to show Congress and the American people the September 2nd video of strikes that killed 2 survivors on a shipwrecked vessel. after the administration's first strike disabled the craft. The American people deserve to see this video and to witness what is being done in their name. The administration has proudly published the footage of countless other strikes, including the first one from the very same day, believing it could do so without compromising any sources or methods used by our military or intelligence services. This FALP footage should be no different. Since the beginning of this campaign of unauthorized strikes against boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, there's been one key feature from this administration, an eagerness to push out the videos of these attacks. We first learned about these strikes when video of an attack was published by the President of the United States, who posted the video of it on his social media. That was video of the first strike on September 2nd. And in the strikes since, strikes that have killed nearly 100 people in the last few months, the attacks have been announced to the world by the President and the Secretary of Defense, posting videos of them on their social media. And last week, we saw the administration distribute lengthy footage of the seizure of an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. So why not release the video of the second strike that the administration ordered on September 2nd? Why is the administration hiding it behind closed doors, sharing it with only a small handful of members, and leaving the rest of Congress and the country in the dark? What is it about the killing of these two survivors that the administration is unwilling to let the people see? The legality of the entire campaign of striking these boats and killing those on board, rather than interdicting and arresting them, has been called into serious question. An attack on shipwrecked sailors is expressly prohibited by the laws of war. The rationale for hiding this video seems far less about any nebulous claim of the need to protect sources or methods, and far more about protecting the administration from accountability and oversight that the American people demand. This legislation is simple. Make this video available, first, in full and without edits, to all members of Congress. And then, if there is any legitimate basis to be concerned with the revelation of some source, method, modus operandi, or technology that isn't already apparent with the eager release of all the other videos, make it public with proper redaction. Surely, the same people who helped scrub and declassify every other video the Pentagon has publicly posted can be enlisted to do the same for this one. Or is the so-called most transparent administration in history afraid of what this video would show? Would it show a clear violation of the laws of war, which use the killing of shipwrecked combatants as the textbook definition of illegal use of force? The truth on this is going to come out. We know that it will. Let it be now. We already know from the reports of our colleagues who have seen the video what it shows. A first strike on a boat, then a short while later, a second strike on the disabled wreckage of the boat, and two survivors, killing them. Now, I should make clear, none of these strikes is lawful because these targets are not combatants. There is no imminent threat of invasion, and there is no legal authorization in the United States or international law for the use of military force for drug interdiction alone. We have condemned campaigns of extrajudicial killings in other countries that have done so to allegedly combat the drug trade, like the Philippines under Duterte, and we must not engage in that conduct here. But the second strike on September 2nd compounds the illegality. It flies directly in the face of laws and values that underpin the U.S. military. So I ask my colleagues to support this bill, allow this legislation to pass, and ensure that we are not hiding information from the American people. After all, the President of the United States said he was fine with releasing the footage. Whatever they have, he said, we'd certainly release, no problem. It's time we hold the President to his promise to be transparent with the American people. Our service members and their families deserve nothing less. Right now, we have a massive military force in the region. We have killed almost 100 people. We are beginning a blockade of a country with which we are not at war and with which the American people do not want us to go to war. Not over regime change, as despicable as the Maduro regime is. The American people do not want to go to war over regime change, which is apparently the real objective here. We should pass a war powers resolution to make clear that Congress does not support a military campaign that may draw us into another endless war or destabilize the region. And we can start by releasing the video of one deadly strike already undertaken, but the evidence of which has been withheld from the American people. I urge passage of this bill. And so, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the bill at the desk to require the release of video strikes conducted on September 2nd, 2025, against designated terrorist organizations in the area of responsibility of the U.S. Southern Command, that the bill be considered, read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Oklahoma.
I reserve the right to object. Mr. President, the junior senator from California knows good and well what classifications mean because he sat 15 years on the House Intelligence Committee until his clearance was pulled in 2023. He understands classifications. He understands when certain things can be exposed and certain things cannot because of the sensitivities of it. He also understands that committees of jurisdiction are privileged with the correct clearance to be able to watch this video because the junior senator from California stated that himself, that it has been showed to not a partisan, but a bipartisan group of individuals that do have the accurate oversight and clearances to watch it. Now, what is this really about? Politics? Maybe. Because during the junior senator's time on the House Intelligence Committee, then President Obama had 500 strikes on terrorist organizations, which, let's keep in mind, we are striking terrorist organizations and no one is denying that. There's 24 cartels that are being deemed terrorist organizations that's poisoning our streets, that's killing our families, that's killing our friends, that's affecting all of our homes, all of our streets, and all of our states all across the country. In fact, to the tune that there has been more people killed in 2024 by drug overdoses by the sum of 10,000 more individuals than we lost with U.S. personnel in the entire Vietnam War. If that's not an attack on us, I don't know. If that's not a terrorist organization that's truly poisoned our streets, then I don't know. But during the time that the junior senator in California said on Intel, not one time did he ever ask for the release of the same videos from the Obama administration that killed 3,700 individuals, including U.S. citizens. Now, if you would think there would be transparency that needed to be released, we would want to see the videos at least on U.S. citizens that was killed in this manner, not these narco boats that's poisoning our streets. But that's really wasn't what this is about. And the junior senator from California knows that. This is all about politics. That's what this is about. Why are we protecting the ones that are poisoning our streets? Shouldn't we be trying to protect the ones that are on our streets? I don't think it's crazy to think that we want to be proactive about going after narco boats. I for sure want to. I have zero issue with this. I've been able to be briefed. I know the junior senator was recently briefed. He's just upset that he may not have the clearances to watch the video anymore. But there is sensitive material, and it was clearly explained why it can't be released. And of all the people in this chamber, the junior senator from California knows when it's in certain classifications, there's a reason for that. So with that, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
First, as my colleague served on the Intelligence Committee when I chaired the committee, he should well know that members of Congress actually don't hold clearances that can be revoked. We either serve on certain committees or we don't. But more to the point, in listening to my colleague address this motion to release the video to the American people, I've heard very little of the basis for an objection to releasing this video, except some nebulous claim that somehow this footage must be classified. And I would pose this question to my colleagues. Do you recognize that this video has already been partly displayed to the American people? That is, the administration was all too proud to show the first part of this same video, the first attack on this ship, to the American people. There was no objection, obviously, to classification or source and method. They showed that to the whole world. They just didn't show all of us the rest of that video. That is, they only showed the footage of the first strike. What they withheld was the footage of the killing of the survivors of the strike. And to make the claim here without basis that, well, somehow the continuation of that footage is confidential, but the beginning of that footage showing the first attack can be released without injury to sources and methods, just doesn't pass the smell test. This is going to come out. It's just a question of how long we have to fight to make this available to the American people. But if the administration is proud of this, if the administration are proud of what it's doing in the name of the American people, they should be proud to show this video to the American people. And we should hold the president, who said, whatever they have, we'd certainly release, no problem. We should hold the president to that commitment. And with that, I yield back.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, in January of this year, tragedy struck just a few miles from here when an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with American Airlines Flight 5342 at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. 67 souls were tragically lost in an instant. After the crash, it quickly became evident that there were common sense changes that would immediately enhance aviation safety. The Army helicopter, flying along the Potomac River, had deliberately chosen not to broadcast its location to other aircraft or to air traffic control using the common aviation technology called Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, or ADS-B. Had the Black Hawk been using ADS-B, like every other aircraft is required to do, tragedy could well have been averted. We've since learned from the National Transportation Safety Board that the military was routinely flying by its own set of rules, particularly around Reagan National, which meant that there had been numerous near misses before this deadly crash. In fact, just last Friday, an Air Force tanker was flying without using ADS-B and nearly collided into a JetBlue plane headed to New York, despite the justifiable public outrage over what happened at DCA. Clearly, the Pentagon's behavior needed to change. In July, I, alongside 8 of my Republican colleagues, introduced the Rotorcraft Operation Transparency and Oversight Reform, or the Rotor Act. After several weeks negotiating a bipartisan agreement with Ranking Member of the Senate Commerce Committee, Maria Cantwell, the committee passed the Rotor Act unanimously. Here's what the Rotor Act does. Number one, it tightens the rules for military aircraft so air traffic control and other pilots have a better idea of nearby planes and helicopters. Number two, it requires all aircrafts, civilian and military, to equip and receive ADS-B signals. Number three, it directs the FAA to comprehensively evaluate the safety of airspaces around airports across the country so that no other airspace has the same risk of collisions that DCA did. And number four, it improves aviation safety information sharing between the FAA and the military. No longer will there be silos of safety data. These improvements will save lives. Earlier this week, the families of the DCA crash victims joined Senator Cantwell and me at a press conference, highlighting how the NDAA had a provision moving backwards on safety and a call for passage of the Rotor Act. 2 of those family members, Amy Hunter and Laura Jean are in the gallery today. I'm happy that they are here to witness the Senate passing the Rotor Act, along with the language removing the offending NDAA provision. Senator Cantwell, Senator Moran, and I have made significant progress with our Senate colleagues, and we've reached an agreement that will allow the Senate to pass this bill unanimously today. I'm also pleased to report that the Rotor Act now has the explicit backing of the White House on this revised product. The White House is committed to helping us work with our House colleagues to see that the Rotor Act passes in that chamber. We still have a few small outstanding issues, but I'm optimistic that we're going to get this done and signed into law as soon as next month. Before turning it over to my colleagues, I want to note two things. One, I want to say thank you to Senator Cantwell for her partnership. She and I have worked hand in hand on this, and I'm grateful for the trust we have with each other and for the work ethic displayed by Senator Cantwell and by her staff, who's worked very hard on this matter. I also want to say this bill will be a fitting way to honor the lives of those lost nearly 1 year ago over the Potomac River. The goal of the victims' families is to ensure that no one else endures a similar, avoidable, completely unnecessary tragedy. And with that, I will yield to Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support the gentleman's future request here and to say that the bipartisan Rotor Act Operation Transparency and Oversight Reform Bill represents a major step forward for aviation safety. Not even 1 year ago, 67 people lost their lives when a Black Hawk helicopter collided with an American Airlines Flight 5342 over the Potomac, and it was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history. I do thank the families who are represented in the gallery today for their steadfast support. This is an important step to honor the memory of their loved ones. I want to thank Senator Cruz for his bipartisanship in reaching this agreement. He and I worked together on legislation we had originally introduced called the Safe Operations in the Open Sky Act, and working with him achieved a date certain for when these requirements had to be met. We came together to craft that bill because safety is not a partisan issue, and this bill reflects it. Most of all, I want to thank the families for their steadfast support of the right answers, even in unimaginable grief. They refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. When the NDAA language came public with rolling back post-crash safety measures that the FAA, NTSB, and the military had agreed to, the families spoke up. They stood at a press conference with Senator Cruz and I. They made phone calls. They demanded better. And today we are closer to delivering on that and what they've asked for. The Rotor Act ends the exemption for planes to be in the airspace without a broadcast signal that includes the military. So no more flying in the dark. And what's most important, it strikes the deadly language that is in the NDAA bill that just passed here that had widened that loophole. The Senate passed the NDAA with that provision in it, but this bill repeals it. And we hope that our House colleagues will take it up very expeditiously, and I thank the chairman for working with the White House and the House to try to get that commitment from them. But just as we've said, we have no idea how this language got in the bill in the first place. I won't be surprised if somebody doesn't try to stop us again. But we will be ready, along with the families, along with our colleague, Senator Moran, to fight for this. This bill requires broadcast technology in aircraft operating in busy airspace. It gives pilots situational awareness and real-time alerts. NTSB Chairman Hamidi and her predecessors have been recommending this for over 15 years. So we want to thank her for her leadership. It also mandates comprehensive safety reviews for all airports across the United States, military and civilian aircraft, where they share the same skies. So not just here, but places like San Diego, Tampa, and Norfolk. and it requires the FAA to establish an office dedicated to FAA DoD coordination. That is really important. It requires memorandum of understanding with the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard to share safety data, and it directs the Army Inspector General to audit pilot training, maintenance protocols, and the compliance. This bill represents real progress. I want to thank the Chairman Cruz, for working with all of us on the committee to get this legislation where it is today, passing the United States Senate with a firm commitment for aviation safety. We will work with our House colleagues to continue to strengthen this. We will work with our House colleagues in the future, but passing this bill today may not be the final step, but it is a huge step forward in getting this legislation to the President's desk. I thank my colleague, and I yield.
Thank you to Senator Cantwell. I will now yield to Senator Moran, who has been a critical leader in fighting to pass the Rotor Act and to ensure that we have accountability and that we do not repeat the tragic mistakes that led to that horrific accident. The senator from Kansas.
Senator Cruz, the gentleman from Texas, and Senator Cantwell, the gentlewoman from Washington State, thank you very much for the opportunity to join with you today and throughout a long process since January the 29th, earlier this year. That flight 5342, originated in Wichita, Kansas, and as we know, on January 29th, it collided with a Army Black Hawk helicopter, and it changed the way we look at air safety every moment since then. And I appreciate the leadership of my two colleagues on the full committee, as well as Senator Duckworth, my colleague on the subcommittee on aviation, to make certain that we take all the steps necessary to make certain that the families who remind us today and almost every day since January the 29th about the importance of making the skies of the United States safe for those who fly today and in the future. There's numerous circumstances that led to this horrific incident, and NTSB's critical investigation into this collision is continuing. While NTSB's final recommendations have not yet been released, the chair of NTSB, Jennifer Hamady, took the unprecedented step of publicly stating that the National Defense Authorization Act does not adequately address the safety concerns surrounding the mixed airspace at DCA. And while NDAA is critical to bolstering our defense capabilities, I have major concerns with the portion of the bill that is being fixed by the efforts today here on the Senate floor with this unanimous consent request. Numerous conversations with my colleagues, Senator Cruz and Senator Cantwell, we secured an agreement from the Senate leadership, and I thank that Senate leadership, Senator Thune, for an amended version of the Rotor Act that it be quickly brought to the Senate floor for consideration to reinstate the advanced critical standards of safety for commercial and military aviation. We're doing that right now. The Rotor Act closes the loopholes that have been described by my colleagues. It strengthens ADS-B requirements for commercial and military aircraft, among many other things. It requires a safety review of DCA and requires better coordination between the FAA and DoD. I commend the FAA administrator for his commitment, and particularly Secretary Duffy for their combined commitment to air safety. In fact, when we conclude this effort here on the Senate floor, our committee is in session, our subcommittee is in session with Administrator Bedford, the FAA administrator, to review what other steps are being taken across the country for a safe airspace at every airport. We are bringing technology to bear that has been only talked about in the past and is now being accomplished. Our aviation system is fragile, and over the last year, Congress has passed significant legislation investing in that airspace to increase the safety and to make sure that all who fly can be and are safe and feel safe. Now is not the time to take any steps backwards, and that's what we were concerned about that the NDAA provision does. While Congress works to ensure in law the safety of our airspace, our DOT and FAA leaders are committed to abide by current safety standards, maintaining that safety at the DCA airspace. As both have said, more work to be done, but it's a pretty good day to be taking the steps we're taking and knowing that more is to come in honor of those who perished on January 29th from Kansas across the country and around the world. I yield back to the chairman of the committee.
Thank you. Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 269, S2503.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 269, S2503, a bill to require all aircraft to be equipped with automatic dependent surveillance broadcast and to improve aviation safety and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceed to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment be withdrawn, the Cruz-Cantwell substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
The senator from Kansas.
Thank you. Congratulations again to my colleagues, and thank you to the United States Senate and its leadership for seeing that the Rotor Act was passed, the version of Rotor Act was passed today by unanimous consent. I rise further today in support of the nomination of Jared Isaacman to lead the National Aerospace and Space Administration, Aeronautics and Space Administration. And Mr. President, that's the vote that is now ensuing just a few minutes later than scheduled. Last week, for the second time, the Commerce Committee favorably reported Mr. Isaacman's nomination with bipartisan support. Now, as NASA takes on some of the most significant tests in its nearly 70-year history, including the beating of China and other adversaries back to the moon, and positioning America for historic in-deep space exploration, the agency needs a permanent Senate-confirmed leader. As chairman of the Commerce Subcommittee on Space and the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science, I have both roles as an authorizer of legislation and the appropriator for NASA. And I've worked with my colleagues and with previous administrations to provide the agency with clear direction and resources needed to achieve NASA's noble goals. And I trust that if he's confirmed, Mr. Isaacman will be a reliable partner in continuing that legacy. Over the course of his nomination, I've had several opportunities to speak at length with Mr. Isaacman about his qualifications for this role, his assessment of NASA's current circumstances, and his vision to lead the agency into the future. I'm confident that he will provide the leadership that NASA needs to sustain and advance America's leadership in space. NASA's mission is not solely the domain of space, and just a couple of weeks ago at Mr. Isaacman's confirmation, I had the chance to discuss with him critical importance to many Kansans, including those in agriculture, NASA's Earth Science Division for supporting Kansas agricultural producers. I was pleased that Mr. Isaacman shares my view that NASA must remain steadfast in its commitment to science. I want to thank Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy for his leadership of the agency as acting administrator over the past several months. Confirming now Mr. Isaacman as the next permanent administrator for NASA will equip our space agency for success. I will be voting yes on Mr. Isaacman's nomination, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I yield the floor. Debate on the nomination.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the question occurs on the Isaacman
Ask for the ayes and nays.
nomination.
Ask
Is
for
there
the
a
ayes and
sufficient
nays.
second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Thank you. Thank you.